Today, my guest is Marc Schulman. He is the primary editor of HistoryCentral.com, which is the largest history website. And you probably know him as the editor and the writer of Tel Aviv Diary, which you see in Newsweek magazine. And we're speaking to him from Tel Aviv. How are we doing? Good morning or good
It's
evening.
fine.
Good evening.
Better this week than last week. Let's put it that way.
Yes, yes. So as we record this, Israel has just wiped out at this point, the Iranian nuclear reactors, and the United States helped as well. And Bibi and Trump are now best buddies, even more so. And there's a whole thing about it. We'll talk about that later. But so now you've written a piece talking about the Gaza war, and in fact, that's the big issue now. Trump is going to start pushing end the Gaza war, and you believe that that's a good thing. End this Gaza war, get the hostages home. Why?
Well, it's my belief, and it's probably the belief at this point by polling 70% of Israelis, if not more. Look, we're not doing very much in Gaza at this point. Yes, we're killing some more Hamas people, but it doesn't really matter. As for every Hamas person we kill, another one is being born, quite literally. And so there is no solution towards total victory against Hamas in the sense of wiping it out. It's been there since 1980s. We've certainly been fighting it since 2000. I don't mean we should stop fighting it. It's a terrible, evil organization whose whole goal is to make sure there's no peace between Palestinians and Israelis. But at this point, the war is counterproductive. Hostages need to be brought back. The only way to bring back the hostages is by negotiations. Hamas has been very clear all along. They'll release all the hostages in return for an end of the war. Now, they want to stay in power. It's not clear they'll be able to stay in power because it's not clear they can do anything to rebuild the Gaza Strip without international help, and it's not clear that anyone's going to help Hamas do it. But that's secondary at some point. They are not a threat to us at this point. They are heavily beaten.
Hamas is not a threat.
No, not now. I mean, yeah, listen, they can always hurt us. Don't get me wrong. In other words, Hamas, all you need is two guys and a bomb, and they can kill people. So, and they've been doing that. I mean, literally, go back to the time of the negotiations of Oslo and the Rabin agreements, and they were blowing things up back then. They were the ones who did the most to derail those talks in one way or another, or turn the Israeli public against peace because they bombed. So we're not going to stop the bombers, at least not anytime soon.
And
But
Hamas, this is the group that October 7th, they were the ones who came across, of course, with the help of 2,000 or 3,000 regular Palestinians who came across as well.
Well, no, look, Hamas ruled Gaza. Let's be clear. They were the government in Gaza. They had won an election in the West Bank and Gaza, but they had refused to accept what was called the terms of the quartet, which was if you wanted to be recognized, you had to accept the agreements that the Palestinian Authority had made in terms of peace, so to speak, or at least cessation of hostilities. They then had a revolt in Gaza, threw out all the people from the Palestinian Authority, threw them out or threw them from buildings.
Yes, they did.
Right, and then took control of Gaza. So they've been in control of Gaza since 2007. So, whatever happened from Gaza, it was Hamas doing it. There's no question about it. And they were the ones, their nukhbas, their groups, were the ones who crossed the border on October 7th and massacred our people. But they were only able to massacre our people because we weren't there. And that's what we seem to people forget. They're going to come back and they're going to come massacre us against. No, they're not going to come massacre us against because we're never going to leave the border unguarded. All that was required was 10 drones flying over the border and maybe another 10 or 15 tanks, and it would have been the worst day in the history of Hamas. But we were not ready. We can go, that's a whole other story we could discuss forever. But we weren't ready, and that's the reason they succeeded. Now, doesn't mean there won't be something else that's going to happen in our history. We won't be surprised, whether it'll be from Iran, whether it'll be from Syria, Lebanon, who knows where. We have to always be worried. They always want to get us in one way or another. But Hamas from Gaza is not the one who's going to surprise us next time. And therefore, we have to bring this to an end because, A, we need these hostages back. We can't leave the people who were taken from their homes and the soldiers who were taken from their beds in the middle, at 6 in the morning, 7 in the morning, and dragged into Gaza. They're still being held in the tunnels of Gaza. And it's, Israel, we went so far to get back one or two soldiers. We now have 20 still there, plus the ones who are dead. And we have to bring this to an end. The only way to bring it to an end is through a negotiated end of the war for the moment. What's standing between it is two cabinet ministers and their co-people in their government, and excuse me, in their party, uh, Finance Minister Smotrich and Ben Gvir, who's the Minister of National Security, someone who Prime Minister Netanyahu said he wouldn't even let into his cabinet previously, but he made him into this position. Two extremists in their views, and two of them who believe that we can't make any agreements. We have to wipe out Hamas. Now, as I said,
Just to explain why he put them in his cabinet.
he put him in his cabinet because he had no other way of making a government, and he had to be in government. Prime Minister Netanyahu, for all his accomplishments, he has two big problems, which are related to each other. One, he's been prime minister for too long. And I don't care how good or how bad you are, whether you're a president or whether you're a prime minister, when you're in office for too long, you begin to think that I am the state and the state is me.
His
And
first term was what, 96? 1996?
Yes, 96 he was first.
96, yeah.
Right. So he's been 19 years prime minister. So again, even if he's the most phenomenal person in the world, and I'm not going to get into an argument he's a good prime minister or a bad prime minister. I will, and I say this all the time if I talk to good people, I don't care how good he is. Someone who's been in office for this long doesn't make the doesn't discern between what's his good and what's the good of the state. And especially in a case where he's under trial for corruption, all of these things make it very, very difficult. And so he believes that anything is okay as long as it keeps him in being prime minister. And so he made a deal with these two people. He knew who they were. He knew, I mean, Ben Gvir was a Kahanist, a supporter of Meir Kahane, and those of us who lived in New York in those years and knew Meir Kahane, and both of us, I think, knew Meir Kahane personally.
He did.
That he had his pluses, but I wouldn't want him to be leading my country. Let's put it that way. And but he made that deal, and now he's stuck with them, and his government would fall, or even if it doesn't fall because the other party said they'd provide him with a security blanket, so to speak. He would be dependent on other people, and he wants to stay in power, and that's his most important thing to him, and that's where we stand. And the deal that we're trying to make now, the deal that I think President Trump will probably impose, we can get into that in a minute, but I'm not sure. But that deal could have been made a year ago. It could have made a year ago. Now, Prime Minister Netanyahu will tell you, but if we had made a deal a year ago, we wouldn't have destroyed Hezbollah. We wouldn't have destroyed, and then Syria wouldn't have fallen, and then we didn't have what happened with Iran. All that's true, but those were accidental results. It wasn't like there was a plan that said, let's keep this war going until we can go and destroy Hezbollah. And yes, this worked out well in those areas. It worked out well, but it could just have worked out the other way. The wars are a terrible, wars, you never know what the results can be. And we've continued this war for all these months. And at this point, as I say in, I guess it's Arabic, khalas, enough must speak. We have to bring this to an end. And on top of all of that, our soldiers are dying too. You stay in this situation, they become targets. They're not, in the beginning of the war, we had fast-moving armor groups, much more difficult to attack that situation. But these are slow-moving, hardly going at all. It's easy to attack in a guerrilla-style situation. The soldiers are tired. I mean, I think about these young men, not even talking about the reservists, but the young men who were drafted at 18, just got out of high school, and they've been at war since the day they went into the army practically. They had maybe 3 months of basic training. They've been at war. That's just not the way this country runs, or people run. I mean, yes, in World War II, there were maybe some similarities. The people who fought in the Pacific kept on fighting, but they also had long periods of time when they were pulled away from battle and had R&R in different places. So this is just too long. It needs to come to an end, and I feel that strongly.
Now Hamas has said, if you basically said, they offered the terms. We will release the hostages, and you let us go, basically, and that's the issue.
That's been the terms for a year.
Yes.
Nothing has changed in a year.
Absolutely.
I can remember sitting in a studio, in an I-24 studio last year. I guess it was May, and on a Thursday night or a Friday night, I was sitting there. We were together with someone who was a former general in the army, and we were lamenting how terrible things were. We didn't know how we are going to get a solution to all this. And then overnight, there was the Biden plan was released. The Biden plan with Netanyahu. It was Netanyahu's plan, Biden's plan, whoever exactly what the plan was. The next day, we found ourselves accidentally in the studio together, and we're both optimistic. We said, here's finally a plan that we could work with that could bring this war to an end. That was last May, so over a year ago at this point. And it could have been brought to an end a year ago, but it hasn't. And here we are a year later. I don't even want to talk about the effect on this country. On top of leaving aside the people who directly, right? I'm not talking about the hostage families. I walk through Hostage Square every day because it's not close to my house, and every morning I walk through it when I take my dog out for a morning walk. And I'm not talking about the families who've lost people, but generally, the amount of emotional toll this has done on the country as a whole is very hard to even try to imagine. I was speaking to one of my neighbors a few minutes ago. We walked outside together at the same time. She's a psychologist, and we talked about how the fact there's no one in this country who hasn't been affected. That it's just the totality of it all. And then on top of which the 12 days we went through when we were all actually worried for our lives. This was an unusual. This wasn't a normalcy. This is not normal. So,
9,000 people lost their homes,
yep.
right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
just incredible.
No, one of the missiles landed about. I can look out my window if I crank my head here and see the building it hit, and it's a brand new building. And you from the front you can't see it. From the back you can see a big hole in the skyscraper and floors after floors blown out. And so you realize this was
Sure.
not the same thing. This was not the same thing. It wasn't the Scuds
No.
from Iraq. This was something else altogether.
Yeah, that's Israel said 90% of the missiles that were fired, ballistic missiles, they weren't, these were ballistic missiles that were coming across. 90% they were able to stop. But the 10% did tremendous. I mean, Soroka Medical Center was hit.
Right.
Ben
Not only
Gurion
that, but also,
University.
yeah,
Yeah,
Ben Gurion, you saw that, and you can see, like I said, right here, a couple of buildings right near me. I live right close to the military headquarters. The buildings here were hit right in this neighborhood. I have a landlord who has a lot of buildings. You talk about one of her buildings that was destroyed in more of downtown, the older part of Tel Aviv. I mean, these things were very dangerous, very deadly, and took out extra. The government offered additional insurance besides what they regularly pay for your things in your house. We all took it out because we went down to the shelter every night. Every time we went down, weren't sure we're going to come up and see what we'd
sure,
see. I took my
sure.
computer with me every time to the shelter because while the materials could all be replaced, and yeah, I'm backed up in the cloud somewhere, but I wanted
Right.
to make sure I had it with me. So.
Absolutely, absolutely. So now, how are they going to? That's what they've got to do. They got to improve this. This 10% is unsustainable,
Right.
and
Well,
so
I heard an interview with Yuval Steinitz, who's the chairman of the board of Rafael. Rafael is one of the three big Israeli defense manufacturers. There's Rafael, there's Israel Aircraft Industries, and there's Elbit. So he spoke about the fact that they're working on a solution. He wouldn't tell me what the details. He wouldn't say what the details were, but they're working on a solution. My guess it's laser based, so you have a a laser system at the end. In other words, if it makes it through the arrow then the last minute you have a laser can knock it down. And
yeah,
I know for a fact that one of the goals in the laser systems is to make them airborne. So if the lasers are airborne, from what I understand, they have 3 times the range and 3 times the power. Has to do with physics I don't understand, but it seems to be the fact as it was explained to me. So, but that will take another 6 months, a year, 2 years. So let's hope we don't get into another round before that.
and meanwhile, Donald Trump, the president of the United States, is saying to Israel, drop the charges against Benjamin Netanyahu. He's been on trial. How many years now? This
Five
corruption.
years. Well,
5 years.
the trial itself is 5 years. The actual the investigation goes back another 5 years practically. But there are two reasons. Look, there are three parts to this. One, Donald Trump should stay out of the judicial system of Israel. I understand he feels he can interfere and he has his own baggage and his own perception, and we won't go into in his perception of the judicial system in the United States. But leave that part aside for the moment. He should not interfere in the judicial system somewhere else. That's number one. Number two, you know, it was Prime Minister Netanyahu who made it very clear that he could do the job of prime minister and go on trial at the same time. There was an attempt at the beginning that he shouldn't be allowed. Now, the reason he's even prime minister and allowed to be is because of this weird issue in the law. If he was a regular minister, he would have been forced to resign. But they said the prime minister doesn't have to resign because if he resigned, the government would fall. So because of a investigation, but no one imagined when they wrote this that he would run again. In other words, he ran again after being indicted, and so no one even imagined that was possible that someone would do that. So that's the reason he's able to run. If, like I said, if he was defense minister, he would have had to resign. He couldn't be in the government, and that's why he can't be the prime minister and something else because he can't be something else. So that's number two in terms of interfering. And three, it's just so obviously Prime Minister Netanyahu trying to use President Trump to manipulate the system. I mean, the reason the trial has gone on so long has two reasons. One, Netanyahu's lawyers have delayed as much as they possibly can in every which way, without doubt. But B, the system. The system, we need judicial reforms, not the type that was talked about by the government, that not the Supreme Court's powers. But the fact of the matter is, the best example of this is there was a woman named Hadass Klein who testified in the beginning of the trial. She was the one who was Arnold Mitchell, who was involved in bringing champagne bottles and all those things to Netanyahu. Her cross-examination went on for 2.5 months. In America, her cross-examination would have been a day. But the system allowed his attorneys to cross-examine her for 2.5 months. So that system has to change. You can't have a system where you cross-examine a witness for 2.5 months. That's insane. So anyway, that's the reason the trial's been going on for so long.
Incredible. And there's no end in sight, I'm sure.
No, there's absolutely no end in sight
No.
because look, he pulled something off this week which was really depressing. I'll put it that way. Last Thursday, Prime Minister Netanyahu went to the judges and said that because of the important security situation, etc., he wants to put off this trial this week for 2 days. They said no. Then he came back with a secret letter with what his schedule was for next week. They said no again. Then on Sunday, they had a secret meeting where he brought the head of the Mossad, the head of military intelligence, the national security advisor to the court to give an idea of what the security situation is, and then he requested again 2 days off. Okay. The judges finally agreed because all these important people. Well, guess what he did yesterday? First of all, no war or anything else started yesterday. He went to Beit Shemesh and went to tour the facility to prepare policemen for jobs in the police. He spent 3.5 hours there with Minister Ben-Gvir. And that's why it was so important that he not testify. Now, I imagine he's in the part of the testimony he doesn't want because he's in the cross-examination of his own testimony. It's where they can bring all sorts of proof for what he said yesterday and what he said today and say, basically, you're not telling the full truth here. So he's been
And now
avoiding.
he's about to fly to the United States.
Right. So now he knew that. So now he got this week off for 2 days. Now he's going to come to the States. I'm sure he'll come back. Look, we're in the middle of making some sort. That's where we are. And look, the mistake, look, Prime Minister Netanyahu, before he became prime minister, in between the time he was no longer prime minister and became again, when Ehud Olmert was under investigation, he said that Ehud Olmert he hadn't been indicted yet, but he was under investigation. He stated that Ehud Olmert needs to resign because we cannot tell what he is doing is for the good of the state or what he's doing is for the good of his own defense. And here we are now. So,
and Ehud Olmert went to prison.
Yes, he did. He was found guilty.
That's right. And so Israel is a country that sends its leaders to prison. Presidents and
prime ministers, absolutely.
Yes, absolutely.
Finance ministers, yes, absolutely.
Okay. What do you see? You see Bibi going to prison?
No.
No.
Listen, I don't see Bibi going to prison. The man already is 75. He's going to be 76. If this trial ever ends, he'll be 80 by the time it ends in the appeals. No one's going to send him to prison, to be quite honest with you. I don't think there's anyone in this country would be opposed to a deal that says a plea deal. you get out of politics, we'll forgive you for your crimes. He wants a plea deal that says, we forgive you for your crimes and you keep on being prime minister. That's what he wants. No
Right.
one wants him in prison. Look, I mean, it's a sad day when a prime minister or a president or anyone else goes to jail. The same way no one really saw President Trump ever actually ending up in jail. Although there were a lot of people who thought it might happen, but no one sees Netanyahu in jail actually. But out of prime ministership, that's what people would like to see at least.
So he comes to the United States. He meets with Trump next week, I guess it is. What do you think is going to come out of that?
Look, it's always unknown because with President Trump, you never truly know, where he's going to be at any given moment. Trump seems to be committed to getting back the hostages. For reasons we'll never know, the story of the hostages actually speaks to him. And I think we need to keep that in mind. Generally speaking, even during the Trump's first term, I said to people who used to say, well, he doesn't know what he's doing, blah, blah, blah. I said, look, I'm not sure he knows what he's doing when it comes to Korea. I'm not sure he knows what he's doing, various places. I said, the one thing he does know is Middle East and Israel. You don't, you're not a New York City um, re real estate player without knowing these things. I remember I ran the Israel Day Parade in the 40th year. He was one of our grand marshals going back then. This is a person who knows this story. He doesn't know everything. He doesn't know all the details. He's not a detailed guy. But this conflict he understood. Even his plan, his last plan, the Trump plan for peace in his first term. It was not the perfect plan, but it was a plan. It might have worked. I said I was on a panel with representatives of the Palestinian Authority back then on TV, and I said to them afterwards, just accept it. Just accept it. Then you can negotiate, figure out what, just accept it. People are too stupid to understand that. And uh, he knows what he wants in this, and he cares about the hostages. I mean, the strange thing throughout this whole terrible, terrible affair is how much more the American governments, both of them, both the Biden administration and the Trump administration, have been able to show empathy towards the families of the hostages much more so than the Israeli government. And that's something that I think I don't understand. None of us understand that because both Biden and Trump and their administration knows it's not just the man on top. The whole administrations have shown incredible empathy towards these people. And, Trump and empathy is not something you think about in the same sentence too often, but he has shown clear empathy towards these people. And I think he really cares and he really wants to get them back and say, not only does he want, he wants to win, obviously, he likes wins, but I think he really wants this win and he wants to bring this to an end. So I think he's going to really pressure Bibi at this point. And Bibi's going to have to decide, take a risk with Trump and go against Trump's will, or I don't think he's going to.
I don't think so.
We have something that's so much more important, which is called Iran, and making a deal with Iran that makes sure they don't get the bomb. That how can you possibly compare that with killing the last member of Hamas in Gaza?
Right. Right.
And
That,
whatever I think about the limitations of Prime Minister Netanyahu, ultimately he loves this country, and ultimately I think he cares, and ultimately I think he'll make the right decision when Trump, pushes him and says, "Listen, you want me to do what you want me to do with Iran? Let's make an arrangement with that, but bring these people home, end the war in Gaza." I hope he goes along with that.
he's also got the Abraham Accords he wants to see if he can broaden as well and bring in some of the other countries.
Right.
And so I do think that's his son, Trump's son, I think was involved in that, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's
Son-in-law, but
son-in-law,
yes.
son-in-law, right? Yeah, because he was deeply involved in that, and I think they want to look. They want to bring in Saudi Arabia. I think that'd be great, and
Yeah,
Israel
I
would
mean,
love
look,
that too.
Dick, also the Syrian issue is a big deal. I mean, the idea,
Oh boy,
the at least the dream of taking a train to Europe, right? I mean, I don't know if it's going to happen, probably not in our lifetimes, but that my children or grandchildren can be able to take a train to Europe, drive a car. The whole concept that we no longer an island would be so transformative. But we'll see. Now, let's not get ahead of ourselves.
right. Well, we'll see. How do you see what's going on in just closer to home, the West Bank, and the settlers fighting the IDF. What the heck is going on?
Okay, so you've always had a group of out of control youth amongst the settler youth. So most of them are settler kids. Some of them are kids, from Bnei Akiva, kids from other parts of the country who have also lost their way. They're anarchists. They don't want to be told they have limits, like little children who don't want it to be told they have limits. So they get really angry at those who give them limits, which is the army. They're encouraged by who's in the government, obviously. You have Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, who themselves did things like this and support these sort of actions and look the other way.
Exactly.
And part of what they do, I believe, is partly planned by members of the government. In other words, some of the pushing out of some Arab villages is part of an overall plan to settle other parts of the West Bank. And I think that's not accidental completely. Attacking the idea of troops, of course, goes way beyond. Look, I'm one of these people who once upon a time believed it was possible to reach peace with the Palestinians in my lifetime. I've long ago given up on that chance. But I'm also one of those people who believe that the only long-term solution to our problem is going to be a two-state solution. It's just more likely to happen in the lifetime of my grandkids than it is in my lifetime. And so I believe in taking actions that will preserve that as an option later on. In other words, I want to make sure that we don't become a one-state solution, because a one-state solution, we've undermined the whole idea of Zionism, because we won't be a clear majority in our own country if we are a one-state solution. So I want to make sure we keep the Palestinians separate from us. We let them have as best of lives as possible without endangering our security. And we know that eventually, someday, they'll be as independent cantons. They'll be independent some which way. They'll have their own partial or full self-rule. Lots of things are going to happen in this world that we can't even imagine. Whether it's from AI or climate change, they're going to have major impacts on so many different aspects of our lives. So it's impossible to see where the future is going to lie 20, 30 years from now. But I want to leave the option open, because I can't think of any other solution that actually will work, if anything will ever work, and maybe nothing will work. One of the problems we have as Americans, we think there's a solution to every problem. Sometimes they're not.
And we see that these youth, the West Bank youth, the violence. Nobody's been arrested. There have been all kinds of.
Well, six were arrested from what happened on Friday night, and they're actually their remand was extended, which is unusual. But the numbers who are being arrested is very, very small compared to the numbers who are doing these things. The problem, again, this government is sort of, not really committed to stopping it. At this point, they might be. When they went a step too far when they burned down a security facility.
Yeah, an IDF security facility.
Yes.
Yeah, attacking the IDF. Exactly. And well, look, it's been a very fast half hour. We've been speaking with Marc Schulman, and you can read his column in Newsweek, Tel Aviv Diary. And
subscribe directly to the Tel Aviv Diary. You can find me on Substack. So
there you go. All right, that's right, Substack. Very good. Well, thank you so much again, Marc Schulman. Thank you.
My pleasure.
This has been Jewish Life. My name is Stewart Ain. Until next week, have a good week.